So in this video, I wanted to take an opportunity to show you some of the things that we put together in our kitchen that we feel are essential for cooking gluten-free. And in our kitchen specifically, we're not entirely gluten-free. Of our family of 5, I eat gluten, as does my oldest daughter, Kayla. But my middle daughter, Riley, and my wife are both gluten-free, my wife being celiac. So it's really critical that we came up with a strategy that worked for us and might work for you too. So we're gonna go through some of the things that I cook with on a regular basis and how I do that. So the first thing we're going to start with are my gluten-free flours, and these are specifically flours that I've purchased. They're blended by other companies, and I've got a couple different ones that I work with. I usually have on hand something like Cup for Cup or Better Batter. It's a flour that's made up of a couple of different flours and starches and includes xanthan gum. I also typically keep on hand a rice flour blend. This one is from Robin Hood, and it doesn't contain xanthan gum. And the reason I do this is there are some recipes out there that call for adding specific amounts of xanthan gum, and you need to start with a flour that doesn't already contain it. Otherwise, it's going to completely throw off the ratio of your starches and flours to your binder agents like xanthan gum. The other flour blend I like to keep on hand is usually a baking mix of some sort. In this case, I've got a Pamela's baking mix. Some people call it a pancake or a waffle mix. It's a mix that includes things like a dairy agent. It includes your binders. It may even contain some fats. It provides a shortcut to achieving some of the different gluten-free baked goods that you might be doing. Biscuits are a great example. It also works really well for making sauces and roux. Other options could include something like a gluten-free Bisquick. It's a great example of a gluten-free baking mix as well. The other 2 gluten-free flours that I typically keep larger quantities of are almond flour and, of course, Trader Joe's rolled oats, which I'll grind up and make oat flour out of as I need. The almond flour I use a lot for doing pie shells and making gluten-free muffins. The rolled oats are used most frequently when I do my meatballs, although I also use them a lot for filler or if I need to add a breading. They work really well as a stand-in. Next, we'll go over some of my component flours. These are flours that I use less frequently and usually keep in the freezer. These are flours that I wouldn't necessarily consider critical or essential to being in your pantry, but are excellent if you want to start venturing into making your own flour blends, or if you have specific recipes that call for particular ratios of starches and flours together, or if you need to augment with xanthan gum. Coconut flour is an interesting one. It is really useful when you're doing desserts, but it doesn't hydrate like other flours do, so it's not something I use a lot of. Buckwheat flour can be used in a lot of different things, or used as a component flour, which I've used to do pancakes. Tapioca flour or tapioca starch is very common, and you'll see it in a lot of your flour blends as well. And it's absolutely critical that you have some on hand, along with potato starch. Potato flour and potato starch are definitely different. Potato starch is more commonly used when making blends, and something you'll want to have on hand if you're going to make your own. It's also fantastic for thickening sauces and gravies. So these are my rice flours: glutinous rice flour or sweet rice flour, white rice flour, and brown rice flour. These are the flours that you'll most typically see in your gluten-free flour blends, along with a binder like xanthan gum. And lastly, I've got my cornmeal and corn flour. They're both made from corn, but the corn flour is a much finer grind. So these are my essential gluten-free grocery items. This is a white bread that I buy from a local grocery store. It's their brand, and it's something that we really enjoy a lot more than the other commercially produced gluten-free breads. And I like to use the crusts, which I save and freeze, for making things like breadings and crumbs. This is a lot less expensive than buying a dried out gluten-free breadcrumb. You can store them in the freezer, dry them out in the oven, and grind them up to make your own gluten-free breading. Using a gluten-free cracker is also a great option, and we usually have at least 1 or 2 boxes of these stashed away in our pantry, either for entertaining or for use in breadings and coatings. This is a gluten-free gravy mix. There's a couple of different flavors, including turkey and beef, and also a gluten-free hollandaise mix that we enjoy when we do things like our Eggs Benedict bake. Next up is gluten-free soya sauce, and this is a big one in our house. I typically buy large quantities of this when it's on sale. Buying gluten-free tamari sauce can be quite expensive, but I've found that the VH brand specifically produces sauces that do not contain any wheat or gluten unless explicitly called out in the ingredients list, even though they don't go through the certification to be gluten-free. As a result, it's significantly cheaper than a lot of the other gluten-free tamari products on the market. One of our favorite sauces that they produce is their garlic hoisin sauce, which is very difficult to find gluten-free elsewhere. Next are my Better Than bouillons. I enjoy using these a lot. They definitely produce a great chicken and beef stock flavor. They don't contain gluten, and they store nice in the fridge without taking up a lot of bulk, and they last a really long time. You can also find beef bouillon cubes, gluten-free. They are a little trickier to find, but they're definitely an inexpensive option if you're looking for something like this as well. And finally, I've got some gluten-free soup concentrate. This can be particularly challenging to find gluten-free. However, I've found that my local store brand doesn't contain gluten in their cream of mushroom and their cream of chicken soup. It's something we enjoyed using when doing crock pot and casserole meals, although it is very challenging to find gluten-free equivalents of condensed soup mixes out there. I do have a recipe that you might want to check out to make your own at home, but this is a much more convenient route if you can find it. Of course, having a gluten-free brownie mix on hand is absolutely essential, and finding one that you like is really, really important. Next up are some of my kitchen tools, and these I wouldn't normally consider to be critical or essential to be able to cook gluten-free, but having a good kitchen scale is really, really important, especially if you're going to venture down the path of building out your own component flour blends, or you're going to be doing a lot of gluten-free baking. I've come to find that a lot of gluten-free baking recipes are listed out by weight for their components, specifically when dealing with flours and starches. So having this is a great way to create repeatable and successful baked goods. Next are my food processors. This is a small food processor, although I've got a full-size one as well. Although I find myself most frequently reaching for this small attachment for my immersion blender. I really like using it because it's quick and easy to clean up, and it works great for chopping up my oats when I'm making meatloaf or meatballs. Having some good aluminum baking pans goes a long way, and I really enjoy using pre-cut parchment sheets on them to speed things up when it comes to cleaning them and getting consistent, repeatable results when doing baked goods. I also really enjoy using a bundt pan with a removable bottom. I find that it works really well when cooking a gluten-free cake, since it allows my cake to retain its height by holding onto the sides a lot better than it would in a casserole dish or in a baking pan. One of the things that's most essential in our kitchen, though, are my cutting boards. And my cutting boards on the island here are always gluten-free. And I've got a couple of them, my main cutting board and one that I use when cutting raw meat. Gluten never ever touches these cutting boards. I know that any time I walk into the kitchen, I can prepare a meal on these cutting boards and never have to worry about cross-contamination. I do, however, keep one cutting board in my kitchen that I do work with gluten, and typically this is with bread or toast or something like that. With my toaster oven, I also keep a separate rack and sheet pans to the side here that only hold gluten-free products. So anytime I'm going to prepare something gluten-free with a toaster oven, I use one of these racks that doesn't have any cross-contamination. Another part of working with cutting boards are knives, and I keep a lot of inexpensive paring knives on hand so that we can confidently use a knife that we know is gluten-free and throw it into the sink to be washed, rather than having to worry about whether or not that knife was used on a product that contained gluten. Another common point of cross-contamination are condiment and sauce bottles. So we typically use spoons to retrieve something out of a jar or a bottle, and then a new knife to spread or use that condiment on whatever we're preparing. And to date, we've never had cross-contamination occur in our kitchen using these methods and tools. So I hope you guys find that helpful. Again, these are just some of the things that I use on a fairly regular basis, things that I consider essential to the way that I cook in our kitchen. You might find some of these things just don't work for you. And some of these things might work really well, and you may have a few tricks of your own that I haven't tried. So feel free to let me know in the comments below what you guys do, what you find really critical or essential to cooking gluten-free. Thanks a lot.